why Marvin Harrison Jr. will be drafted before LSU wide receiver Malik Nabers.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oh, it's a feel-good Friday once again, and we're a few weeks away from the NFL draft. Hard to believe we're already to that point of the year, but when it comes to NFL draft in Ohio State, we got to talk about Rob Marv. Welcoming everyone to a Friday edition of Locked On Buckeyes here on Friday, April the 5th in the year 2024. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast, and here today to kick off a shorter series before the draft than normal is my favorite NFL draft analyst, Ryan Roberts. He is here. Ryan will be with us over the next few weeks talking about Ohio State draft prospects, breaking down the film, providing a scouting report, and also predicting where they will be drafted. And I made a statement earlier. I wasn't planning on saying it, but I think it's true that Marvin Harrison Jr. will be drafted before Malik Nabers. Ryan, tell me why that statement is true.
I mean, I think that for me always is that look, the evaluation process is about checking boxes at the end of it, right? Malik Nabers checks a lot of boxes, Jay. I almost called you Joe because I record Joe so dang often. My apology. You got that J at the beginning, man. It's your fault. It's your fault you were born as a J. But Malik Nabers checks a lot of boxes. He's incredibly explosive. He's springy. He's productive. He played at LSU. Like, there's a lot of good things about Malik Nabers. But I think we're overlooking a little bit of Marvin Harrison down the stretch of draft process because he didn't test and there's nothing new to talk about, right? Like if Marvin Harrison Jr. would have went to the combine and ran 4.4 flat, we'd be like, oh, he's pretty good, right? Like he's a pretty good player. It's just, it's like one of those things. I have the same conversations in Notre Dame's land about the Joe Alt stuff right now, right? And Joe Alt is now considered pretty consensusly the number one offensive tackle in 2024. Yeah. But like there was a big jockeying point at one point of like, is it Olu Fashanu? Is it Talisa Fuaga? Is it JC Latham? Like there's a lot of names, right? I feel like it's the same thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. And I would throw them in the same bucket because what's the issue with Marvin Harrison? What is the issue? What, you don't like 6'3 plus wide receivers with length that can run, that are route technicians, that have NFL bloodlines and were ultra productive at Ohio State playing under Brian Hartline, who is widely revered as one of the top, maybe the top wide receiver coach in all of college football? What are we doing with Marvin Harrison Jr. this time of year? We're nitpicking just to nitpick at this point, right? Like there's just not really a hole in Marvin Harrison Jr. Is he going to be the most dynamic after catch receiver of all time? No. Does he still need to improve his play strength a little bit? Sure. But ultimately, can't teach 6'3 plus, can't teach the athleticism. You can teach the route running, which he already has. You can't teach the NFL bloodlines that he already has. And you can't teach the fact that he's already been playing under Brian Hartline, one of the best technical teachers of the wide receiver position in all of college football. He just checks every box, Jay. And I do believe that he will be the first wide receiver taken because there just really isn't a hole in his game. And I think that the NFL values that very heavily.
I was listening to Joel Klatt on his show, and I don't really listen to Klatt much outside of the season, but I still think he's a really good analyst. And he was talking about the game against Michigan, which ultimately was Marv's final game in a Buckeyes uniform. And he said that was possibly some of the worst play occasionally at times in that game that he ever saw from Marvin Harrison Jr. In your analysis and kind of viewing Marvin Harrison Jr. as a draft prospect, how do you view his play in that game specifically?
Jay, I mean, there's context that's always missing in those types of conversations, right? It's like Notre Dame the last 2 years. He hasn't been as productive as he has been in some games. You know why? Because he's playing a really good corner. And believe it or not, they're allowed to do things to stop him at times, right? You're playing against Will Johnson at Michigan, who I know it's an Ohio State channel, so we hate Michigan. And trust me, I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I also detest that school up north, right? Like I hate the University of Michigan, but Will Johnson's a stud. He might be a top 15 player in the 2025 NFL draft. We will be talking about him this summer. He is an absolute fantastic player. Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame is another really, really good corner in potentially in the 2025 class. Yes, he's not going to be quite as productive as he is against X team that doesn't have a great corner. Like there's going to be battles back and forth. But regardless, he did make some good corners look very pedestrian at times. I mean, go turn on the Penn State game where they had Kalen King, who was considered an All-American going into the season, and Marvin Harrison Jr. young boyed him the entire game for the most part, right? You're allowed to not have crazy production every single week when the context is you're playing against a really good football player. But you still see, even in that game, all the makings of being a number one unquestioned wide receiver on the next level. You see the length, you see the route running, you see the athleticism, you see the adjustment in the air, you see the competitiveness, and you see the attention to detail. Again, there's just not a lot missing, but we're not going to completely derail a kid's draft stock because he happened to go against a fantastic All-American corner, and who, lo and behold, the kid also is pretty good and is going to make some plays.
You know, it was not just him. The more I can't stand I can't believe I'm going to say this. Mike Sanders still also caused some issues in that game too.
He might be the top nickel in 2024. So
dude,
yeah,
he's insane.
Yeah.
I'm watching him at the combine and I'm like, why did you go there? You should have come to Ohio State. It would have made a whole lot more sense. But kudos to him. Like, he is a really good player. But Michigan's defense was really good. Marv did some amazing things against some really good defenses. And there were times that he did not do some amazing things against really good defenses. But that's just the nature of the beast. Ryan, where do you see any issues in his game that at the next level he might have issues in the first few years when he's a pro?
Yeah, one more quick note about our previous conversation is also Kyle McCord was very bad in the Michigan game. So that's another little bit of context to maybe why his production wasn't as great.
Oh, right? No. We're going to continue this. We're going to continue this one because, yes, he was. He was bad. I have tried for a very long time, Ryan, to defend Kyle McCord because I feel like people were saying things about him that they should not have said. No, he was bad.
He was
also the best defense he played all season. And so that's a big reason why he had the errors and the issues that he had. But no, he was bad. I think I'm still not sold that Will Howard is a major upgrade over Kyle McCord. I'm not going there, but he was bad. He was, but I don't know, man. That Syracuse thing is still a little odd to me.
Yeah, well, it's going to be really interesting for Kyle because I think that we can say on one hand that he did some good things for Ohio State last year and say on another hand that he came short in a couple games, right? And obviously the Michigan game is a key observation that is a fact that happens. The Syracuse thing is very interesting because their offensive, I forget if he's just a quarterback coach, Nunzio Campanella. He has New Jersey ties as well. And so they are very familiar with one another. So that's kind of where that marriage happened there for Kyle as far as Syracuse is going to build the offense around Kyle McCord. We'll see if it's successful, not successful. Like we'll talk about it obviously, but that was the selling point there. Back to the original point though, Jay, I'm sorry. I get on crazy tangents. I have ADHD for people that haven't seen my content before. Like I kind of ramble a little bit at times. Marvin Harrison Jr., places that he can improve. One place I think is easily improved. It's just a maturation thing. I think we forget about Marvin Harrison Jr. that he's only a third-year player coming out of high school out of St. Joe's Prep. Like he's still a young guy for the most part. Well, not for the most part. He is a young guy. He can still get physically stronger. Is kind of my point, right? He does a great job of finishing through content and winning in the air, but there are some times where I think it could be a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more consistently. Like he can still up the play strength because he is a big outside-oriented wide receiver. He is going to have to work against press consistently. He's going to have to finish in the air, down the field, working at the catch point. He's going to have to do those things. So improving the physicality as far as play strength, I think would take his game to a whole other level because I think he's pretty good at it now, but I think he has a frame to be great at it. Like I think that he can be a tremendous player consistently through contact. So just improving play strength. My only other thing against him is I don't think he's a dynamic after catch receiver, but we've talked about this before. I don't really care. I mean, like I'm not going to ask him to do that on the NFL level. Like I don't care. I mean, he's going to play in the boundary a lot. He's going to play to the field at times outside, but he's going to be an outside-oriented receiver that's going to win with route running and body control and body positioning. So those things, I don't care that he's not a great after-catch receiver. If I wanted a great after-catch receiver, I would go after Malik Nabers, but I'm going to go after the guy that I think is a high-volume difference maker to all levels of the field, and I think that's what Marvin Harrison Jr. is.
Marvin Harrison Jr. had an interesting path to the draft. There were some things that aren't conventional for any draft prospect. Is that a problem for him? We'll dive into that next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to the IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Ryan, I'm always a person that when it comes to the pre-draft process, you work out at the combine and you work out at the pro day. If you decide to not do the combine, do the pro day. But if you decide to not do the pro day, you do the combine. You do one or the other. Marv's decision to not work out at either, initially I was like, okay, he doesn't have to. Like, the film speaks for itself. And I'm very glad that he has his dad in his corner who has a good brain, and his people in his corner are very smart, and they're realizing, bro, your film is better than everybody else's. Like, doing these drills in your underwear does not really help anything. With him and the way you view the draft and previewing and making him a draft prospect, did him not working out at the combine or the pro day hurt him?
I don't think so. I think the one thing that it comes with it is a little bit of stagnation. I mean, when you choose not to do something, Jay, I mean, there's going to be some archaic scouts, some like old school dudes that are just going to be like, oh, you should do this, right? But like, it's just not the world we live in anymore. We're in a world where the GPS technology tells us how fast guys are on the field now, so it doesn't matter as much, right? I know that Marvin Harrison's a really good athlete. Like, I can back up the GPS data. I can watch him with my own eyes. I know he's a really good athlete. So it doesn't matter to me personally. I think the one threat that you have with that, though, is that there's a stagnation as far as whatever Marvin's draft stock was coming into the event is what it's going to stay at. Like, you're not going to move up and down boards necessarily. Your grade's not going to change at all. I mean, it honestly shouldn't either way, but we do know that some people overreact and underreact to, certain testing. Like, it just happens, right? I think the threat that you have is that if a team had Malik Nabers very close to you, and then he went to his pro day and ran 4.3 and had a 42-inch vert, some people might convince themselves that that's going to push him over top of a Marvin Harrison Jr. So you don't have a potential to fall by not testing, but you also don't have the potential to rise. That's kind of the thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. opting not to do any of the testing, is that he didn't have a chance to move up and solidify it all. He just was like, I am what I am, and I'm going to prepare to be the best version of myself when I get to the next level. So that's, I think, the only threat potentially, but I honestly don't even think that that's much of a threat, to be honest with you.
No, I don't think so either. I think that the consensus on him being the number one receiver in this draft cycle, I think it's been the consensus for a long time. I didn't really hear people push back on that. I think until after Malik Nabers' pro day, that's when like that noise started to pick up a little bit, which is cool. Like, that's going to happen. Like, not a big deal. People right now are talking about, on the basketball side, Zach Edey, 7'4", 300 pounds. He's saying that he can do all this stuff in the NBA, when most people have always said about Zach Edey, he probably won't be an amazing or dominant NBA player. The game is just different. But when you're doing things recently, people will pick up and that narrative will get louder. For Marv, I wonder how many other players will take this path that, with him being an elite guy, saying, well, people are telling me I'm elite. People are telling me I'll be a first-round pick, maybe the second or third or fourth offensive lineman, offensive tackle, take it off the board. People are saying all these things about me, so I won't have to work out at the combine. I may show up and talk to teams, but I won't do any physical workouts. I won't have to work out at the pro day. I'll show up and root on my team, but I won't have to do any of these things. And Ryan and me, I'm wondering, it's kind of like guys sitting out of bowl games. you can sit out of a bowl game, but at times too many players might sit out of a bowl game.
Sure.
There might be somebody that needs to work out the combine and the pro day, both in a season and a cycle. They choose not to point back to Marv, and then people say, Marv is different. Your film is not as different as his, and it could hurt a player down the road.
Well, I think where we're going is very simple. It's going to become more prevalent for the elites initially, right? Every year we're going to have a couple elite prospects that are probably going to opt of like, hey, I don't need to do anything, right? Like, I think that's going to happen more moving forward. I do think it's going to become even more prevalent than that down the road because, again, I think the GPS data, there's just going to be a lot of agents, I think, that are going to be in people's ears of like, hey, man, like, you already proved you're fast. Like, we don't need to prove that you're fast. Let's focus on the things that you do need to prove, right? Whether that is making sure you're prepared for the initial push in the NFL, or if that's a interview thing, right? Like if you're a guy that's like a supreme athlete, but maybe there's some questionable character flaws in you in the past, like maybe that's where more of the attention goes ultimately on the next level. So I think it's going to be more prevalent in elites, but I do think it's going to spread a little bit more than that down the road. Eventually, Jay, and I say this as a lover of the NFL draft, and I've been loving this thing since I was probably 8 or 9 years old. Like I have been a draft nick or draft nerd, however you want to phrase it, for a very long time here. I think eventually the combine is going to die a little bit. I do. There's always going to be players that need it, but I think the coverage of it is going to take some steps down moving forward here because for a long time, Indianapolis, the combine didn't make player friendly as far as the reasons that you want to compete at the combine. And now that we're seeing players starting to opt out of it, I think that that's going to start a little bit of a chain reaction. And I think the combine might die eventually, which is very sad for me to say. Hopefully I'm retired at that point that it fully dies because I absolutely loved it Indianapolis week, man. It's one of my favorite weeks.
You know, I sure hope so too, because I know what what that means for the city and the fact that fans can now go to the event and watch them. And you get a Purdue kid out there, a Notre Dame guy out there. The local fans are going to cheer and cheer very, very loudly. So I hope it doesn't go anywhere. I hope it stays in Indianapolis. And even if I don't live in Indianapolis, which I currently don't, I kind of miss living in that city living around the city. That city is getting very dangerous. The crime and people getting shot and killed too often. It's not fun, but the sports scene is fun. It's enjoyable. And that's something that's been appointment viewing for a lot of NFL fans, but also it's going to be an appointment for people to go with their kids and their youngsters down the road. Whenever this is going to be like a little family segment for you, Ryan. Do you ever think that's an event that your daughters might enjoy down the road?
No, personally not.
That was a pretty quick no.
I think that they would find enjoyment at a certain age of like seeing the guys, in the stadium and stuff and just being in Lucas Oil and stuff. Yeah. But for people that have been there, it's much more about like, well, one, you're covering the event if you are a professional and you're covering it, but then it's the nightlife more than it is like the family life, in my opinion, right? So I don't think my family will ever be ones, because I will say this, Jay, about Indianapolis is it's a perfect spot for the events because obviously you have the inside stadium, but also the skywalk and everything's so close together and it's not much separation. Like it's a perfect city for it. So for the person that just kind of wants to, get out there and enjoy themselves and just kind of mingle with people and do all that type of stuff, I think it's a great environment. I don't know if I would ever say it's a family one though, for me personally, just based upon my experience. I think there's a little bit of adult activities that happen a lot at night specifically. So
Ryan, I forgot. Didn't even ask you this question earlier.
Yep.
Who drafts Marv in the draft?
I think the conversation starts with New England at 3. I'm not sold that they will stick there for 1, and I'm not even sold that they will draft Marvin Harrison Jr., but I think the conversation at least starts there at 3. And then I think the conversation heats up extensively at number 4 to Arizona. And then at worst, I think it's the Los Angeles Chargers at number 5. So I think we're looking at number 3 to 5, somewhere in that ballpark.
Nobody wants Harbaugh to coach him. Nobody.
Well, he's seen him a lot, hasn't he? So
yeah, and he's beat him every time he's on the field. Right. It's just so sick.
Well, if you can't beat him, join him. I've heard. So I don't know.
As long as he gets, I guess if he gets paid, maybe that may make it okay.
Right. Yeah.
So weird. Ryan, there's one more guy that's on our list for the day. It's Cade Stover, a tight end. Some may have forgotten about how good he was at Ohio State outside of Columbus. We're going to dive into his talent and where he might fall in the draft, that's coming up next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Taking the guesswork out of buying baseball tickets is huge for my family. Every year, we take a trip to Cincinnati to watch the Reds and Cubs play. Finding a place that takes the guesswork out of the whole ticket buying process is huge for us and also allows us to save money at the same time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I really, really liked watching Cade Stover play football. His progression from when him and Jeremy Ruckert were the top two tight ends at Ohio State to when Cade Stover was playing linebacker in the Rose Bowl, which I will never forget that part, to the past couple of years where he was a tight end that really was a difference maker and made his mark at Ohio State. Ryan, the scouting report, when you watch the film on him, what do you see?
I see probably one of the highest floors of any tight end in the class, right? And he brings, and we've talked about this before, but he brings a very physically imposing profile to the table in the sense of this young man is very well filled out frame-wise. He's very, very physical at the point of attack. He might be the best blocker in the class. If not, he's definitely in the conversation of potentially being. Plays well through contact as a pass catcher, has very reliable hands, and he wins in the air. Those things are all very sustainable at the next level because things are only going to get more physically demanding on the next level for the NFL. So I think he brings a great floor to the table. Now, Jay, I will say this. He tested a lot better than I thought he played at on the field. I did not think he was a great athlete. I thought he was a solid athlete for the tight end position. He tested like a good athlete, though. So I'm curious to see if some NFL teams talked him into maybe being some underlying upside there as far as like higher floor. I mean, because again, higher ceiling, because he ran 4.65. Like he had some really good testing numbers. So maybe there's a little bit of underlying upside there that I'm not giving him credit for. But for me, I see a just really good tight end 2 on the next level or low end tight end 1. Like I see that type of player. I don't see star. I don't see high volume producer, but I see a good football player who is going to be on a roster for the foreseeable future.
Well, it's just not a problem. It's not a problem at all.
It's going to make a lot of money in the NFL days. It's going to make a lot of money. Yeah.
Making a lot of money, doing something that he loves. And I think he'll always be remembered in Columbus for doing some of the dirty work. Oh, yeah. I have a great appreciation for him as a blocker than I did a couple of years ago. Not the best blocker in the world. I mean, I think we all know that, but he's solid and he's consistent. And there were some plays in the passing game where you get him up the seam, he could beat some guys in one-on-one situations. Ryan, I think that translates to the next level. Do you agree?
Yes. Oh, it absolutely does. Again, I think that he is at worst the high-end tight end 2 in a 2 tight end set and a lot of 12 personnel. But I think that there is a reality where he becomes a number 1 tight end in the NFL, probably a little bit more on a low-end spectrum. He reminds me a lot of John Carlson that played for the Seattle Seahawks back in the day, as far as like just, again, athletically, it's not going to knock your socks off, but then you look over you just look in the stat sheet and you're like, oh, he had 60 receptions this year. Like he was just a good player ultimately, right? So I think he's kind of just that sneaky presence in the passing game, and he brings the make it traits as a blocker and the physicality he has and the ability he has to win through contact. So yes, it translates to the next level. I would be surprised if he's not at least a high-end tight end 2 on the NFL level.
So you mentioned earlier that he tested better than you expected. I think that came up in our show before he even went to the combine and did the pro day. You were kind of expecting a certain test from him, but he tested better. Did that alter your evaluation of him at this point in time?
It doesn't alter anything because I think when we talked about it, I think I predicted like 4.78, like somewhere in that ballpark, right? He ran 4.65.
I feel like on film when you watch him play, 4.78's accurate. Like 4.78, maybe 4.75, which are very, I mean, it's basically the same thing. Yeah. You're probably thinking that is what you see when he's on the film. But a 4.65, to me, that changes things and maybe wonder if there's another level that can be tapped into in the National Football League.
So what testing numbers do, and which they should do, is it's a verification process, right? If I watch Cade Stover's film and I'm like, hey, he's a 4.65 guy, and then he runs 4.65 at the combine, you're good. Everything checks out, right?
Yeah.
For me personally, him seeing me thinking he's a high 4.7, closer to a 4.8 guy, and then you're running 4.65, that tells me I might need to go back and watch again, right?
Yeah,
Like I might need to go back and just double check, make sure my eyes saw what they saw. And I actually did go back and watch Cade a little bit more because I was actually trying to just watch a little bit more of Marvin kind of down the stretch. And I'm doing a little bit of early 2025 work. So I was also watching Emeka Egbuka and Travion Henderson and like those cats. But so I'm watching Cade, and I'm comfortable with my opinion of him athletically. Like I think he's a solid athlete on the NFL level for a tight end. Everything's functional. Everything is requisites, which I think is totally fine on the next level. So it might have some evaluators. So that's what should happen, in my opinion. That's what should happen. Verification. But there are going to be definitely some scouts on the NFL level that are going to look at him and be like, hey, man, that number is just better than I thought it was going to be. There's something more there than I didn't see, and not ever double check their work. It's going to happen because there's a lot of great scouts in the NFL. Hate to break it to people out there. There's a lot of bad scouts too, man. Like there's not all of them are great, right? And that's why there's so many misses at the level that we see, especially with certain teams. So I do think that is potentially in a vacuum going to move them up some people's boards. For me personally, it's not going to change much because I went back and double checked and did my homework, and I'm just comfortable with where I personally saw him.
Ryan, I want to hope. Okay. I think he's an early day 3 guy.
Yes.
Early.
I would agree. Yeah.
My Ohio State fandom, which I can't take it out of me at all, thinks he could be a late day 2 guy. I know late day 2 is probably less likely than early day 3.
Right.
But where do you fall in that conversation?
Well, here's the thing that Stover has going in his favor. By the way, it's cool that Ohio State's going to have another Stover on the roster. His cousin, that's Garrett. He's a really good player, by the way. But Cade, the thing that he has in his favor is that his tight end class kind of stinks, right? Like it's not a very good tight end class. You have Brock Bowers, and then you have a lot of question marks on who's tight end 2, and then tight end 3 to 4 or 5. It's like there's a bunch of names, but there's not a lot of clarity in the class, right? So I would say right now, I would put a 4th on Cade, but I would say 4, give or take a rounds, right?
Okay.
So it could be 3rd, could be 5, because it just takes, look, I guarantee that there's some teams out there. I would almost be shocked if this wasn't true. I would be shocked if there's not a team or 2 out there that has Cade Stover as their 3rd ranked tight end in this class, because the way I look at it is, for me personally, is that I have Brock Bowers, a clear tier break, and then I have Jatavion Sanders from Texas. He's my tight end 2 in this class.
Okay.
But after that, you're either going to bet on Theo Johnson's athleticism, or you're going to love the higher floor of a Cade Stover or a Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State. Like those are the most likely guys, in my opinion. So I do think that Cade has a chance to go on day 2 because his tight end class lines up for him to be a little bit of a riser.
Interesting. Didn't really think about that in that way. You mentioned something a little bit earlier about some players in the 2025 cycle. I want to kind of dive into them quickly. You mentioned Henderson.
Yes.
He's a fan favorite. What's your thoughts when you watch him play?
I mean, Henderson's incredibly explosive. He's not really, I wouldn't say he's an overly creative runner. Like his quickness is fine, but he's more of a one cut and go type of back. And when he gets to his 2nd, 3rd gear, like he is explosive. Like there's no doubt about it. I still have questions as far as, I mean, obviously the durability stuff the last 2 years, right? But then he doesn't consistently break tackles as much as you would want him to be. So I think that you're just kind of, you're still forecasting a little bit with Travion Henderson. I mean, like the good is great, right? But like then the average is very average. I mean, like there's just some points where I'm just like, hey, like I saw him bust off a big one against Notre Dame where it was just like that speed is deadly, man, when he hits the corner. But then also there's other times where it's just like shoestring tackle and he's on the ground, right? Like he just doesn't consistently work through contact as well as I want. I hope that he's able to just pack on a little bit more power in his lower body and he's able to take that next step because he certainly has the talent to be a top 50 pick. I mean, he has that type of upside, but I would say right now I'm more in like the top 100 boat with Travion just because I want to see a little bit more power and tackle breaking ability.
You know, I've seen some video of him and some pictures from spring practice. He looks bulkier than he has over the past few years, which I think that's going to go into hopefully a more fierce running style So he's not beating, so he's breaking more tackles. But also, when your running mate is Quinshon Judkins, you need to get bigger because Judkins is a dude. He's really good. Have you watched film on him?
Yeah, he's very different from Travion. He is not the home run back. He's more of a short area. Like he's going to get up to his second gear quick, right? But he's not a guy that has a third gear where he's just going to break open a touch of stuff. But he's physical, right? Like he's a downhill. He is one cut similar to Travion, but he's one cut in that he's a power-oriented runner. So he's downhill. I have questions about, just kind of his long speed and his ability to create explosive plays consistently on the NFL level. But if you want a guy that just brings a level of physicality as an early down rusher, Quinshon Judkins has a lot to bring to the table in those departments. They should be a great pairing, though. They should be a great pairing together. They really should.
Dude, it's insane that they were able to get both of them together. Then you got a new running back coach in Carlos Lachlan from Oregon. I don't know much about him, but the numbers tell me he did something good in Oregon with that running game. I hope he can do that same thing in Columbus. Do you know much about him on the recruiting side of things and how he's done out there?
Yeah, I mean, they have some guys that are still on the roster. Obviously, you lose Bucky Irving this offseason, but they had guys like Jordan James that are still kind of ready just to walk into opportunities, right? So, you can't be on Dan Lanning's staff without being a good recruiter. Like
Correct.
It is a requisite to be a part of the Oregon staff just in general. So he did some tremendous things though as a coach. Bucky Irving, Jay, went to the combine and tested like an extremely poor athlete, right? But then you watch the film and you're like, the kid's film is just fantastic. Well, that's partly coaching, right? Like you got that kid comfortable and really just, I had to use the word comfortable again, but like he was comfortable in his own skin and he was able to take advantage of everything he did and play at a fast speed because I think he was well coached. So I think that was actually a great hire by Ohio State, man. Like, I think that will end up being a home run for them long term.
You can follow Ryan Roberts on X. He's my favorite NFL draft analyst. He'll be back over the next few weeks talking about Buckeye draft picks and where they will fall in the 2024 NFL draft. Follow him on X at Rise, the letter in draft, also known as Twitter. You can follow me on the same platform at jstevens07. Send all emails to jstevens317 at gmail.com. We're out of here, Buckeye fans. We'll see you next time.